Sacred Heart Hospital in Savannah hums with that particular fluorescent buzz that only exists at 3 in the morning, the kind of sound that burrows into your bones after 8 months of night shifts. Brooke Sullivan moves through the emergency department like smoke, efficient and nearly invisible, her movements so economical that the other nurses have stopped noticing when she arrives or leaves. Her scrubs are pressed. Her badge is clipped exactly where it should be. Her name reads without decoration, no middle initial, no credentials beyond RN, and that is precisely how she has designed it. The ER at this hour is a strange kind of quiet. 2 GSWs in beds for and 6, stable for now. A 68-year-old with chest pain in Bay 3 who keeps insisting he's fine. A drunk who punched a wall and won't stop laughing about it. The fluorescent lights cast everything in that sickly greenish white that makes the blood pressure monitors seem to glow like small electronic gods, and Brooke has already checked them twice, documented her findings with the kind of precision that would make a military quartermaster weep, and moved on to the supply station without anyone asking her to do any of it. She reaches into her locker during the break that isn't really a break, it's more of a pause, a moment to breathe between the chaos, and touches the boots. They are still there. Worn leather, the color of old coffee, the sole on the right one restitched in 3 different places by hands that had loved her. Her husband's hands. He'd resoled them the first time when she came back from her first deployment with the heels worn to nothing but felt. The second time was after Baghdad, after everything went sideways, after the government came to her with papers and erasure and a new name. The third time was 2 years before the car accident that took him, and sometimes she thinks he knew, somehow, that he needed to repair them one last time for the journey she'd have to make alone. She touches them once. Just once. The ritual takes 3 seconds, and when she pulls her hand back, her fingers are steady. The tremor in her left hand, old shrapnel, still embedded near her spine, courtesy of a building collapse in the Jolan district, doesn't manifest during the day shift. Only at night, when the adrenaline isn't running, when she's had time to feel the weight of things. But by morning, muscle memory and will have tamped it down into something invisible again. The tap of her badge against her sternum sounds like a heartbeat as she walks back to the main ER floor. 12 years of service, 2 Purple Hearts, a Navy Cross that the government sealed away in a vault with her real name and her real rank. At Sacred Heart Hospital, she's just Brooke. Just a nurse. Just someone who shows up, does her job, and doesn't make waves. Just someone nobody looks at twice. Dr. Hargrove arrives early for morning rounds, though it's still dark outside, still that dead hour when the city hasn't decided whether it's asleep or awake. He's in his 50s, silver threading through dark hair, expensive watch that probably costs more than Brooke makes in a month, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He carries a tablet like it's a scepter. His shoes click on the linoleum with the precision of a man who has never once worried about being quiet. He pauses at the 4 station and watches her work. She doesn't notice at first, or rather, she notices and doesn't acknowledge. There's a difference. A patient in Bay 2 needs fluids, and Brooke is prepping the line, alcohol swab, careful assessment of the vein, the kind of stillness that comes from having done something 10,000 times and never having gotten it wrong. The needle goes in with barely a whisper of resistance. The flash of blood in the hub. The catheter threading smooth. The tape application that looks almost like calligraphy, the way her fingers move with such surgical precision that it almost doesn't look like nursing at all. It looks like something else. Something more. Hargrove's jaw tightens just slightly. Not enough that most people would see it. But Brooke does, because she's trained to see things, the micro-expressions that precede violence, the way a person's breathing changes a half-second before they move, the tiny tells that separates the hunters from the hunted. She continues working. Saline flush. Patent for line. Documentation so meticulous that the EHR system shows not just what she did, but exactly when she did it, exactly how she did it, and exactly what the patient's response was. He makes a note on his tablet. His stylus moves with a little more pressure than necessary. "Clean work, Brooke," he says, and his voice carries the kind of dismissive warmth that successful men use on people they've already decided don't matter. "You've been doing this a while." She caps the saline flush and moves to the sink. Long enough, doctor. 8 words. Soft voice. Eyes on the task in front of her, not on him. The practiced invisibility of someone who has learned that being noticed is dangerous, that standing out gets you killed, that the best way to survive is to be so perfectly ordinary that people forget you existed the moment you leave the room. Where'd you come from before, Savannah? He's not actually interested. She can tell. He's asking the kind of question you ask when you're making conversation that doesn't require real answers. Around, she says, and hands off the 4 to the unit's other nurse, Rodriguez, who nods and takes the patient's arm without comment. Brooke has been here 8 months, and in that time, she has perfected the art of being helpful without being memorable, present without being present. She shows up. She does excellent work. She never complains. She never pushes back. She's the kind of nurse that departments run on, reliable, quiet, competent, but she's not the kind of nurse that gets asked to mentor, or to speak up in meetings, or to be anyone's favorite. This is deliberate. Every bit of it. Hargrove watches her for another 3 seconds, and she can feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing, like pressure. Then he moves on to the next patient, the next chart, the next opportunity to assert his authority in a place where his authority is absolute. He's the senior ER physician at Sacred Heart. He's on the hospital board. His name is on the letterhead of 3 profitable consulting practices. He's untouchable, and he knows it. What he doesn't know is that he's being watched by someone who has spent the last 8 months becoming invisible specifically so she could be forgotten, and who has spent the last 8 months documenting everything with the kind of precision that military intelligence training instills in a person. Every chart she's written is perfect. Every procedure she's assisted is documented. Every shortcut she's seen Hargrove take, the ones where he bills for consultations he didn't provide, the ones where he orders procedures that weren't clinically indicated, the ones where the kickback percentage favors his accounts rather than his patients' outcomes, every single one of them exists somewhere in the EHR system, creating an audit trail that he has no idea is being laid down beneath his feet like a tripwire. But she's patient. She's been trained to wait. In Baghdad, in the rubble of the Jolan District Hospital, she'd waited for 6 hours while enemy fire tore through the structure because moving would have killed the soldiers she was protecting. She'd held a tourniquet on a femoral artery while a colleague performed a hasty amputation with a trauma shear because that's what medics do, they wait for the right moment, and then they act. The morning shift begins to arrive around 5. The day nurses filter in like a changing of the guard, fresh and relatively human again. Brooke gives her report to the incoming charge nurse, stable patients, no major changes, all documentation current, and nobody asks her personal questions. Nobody ever does. She's been here long enough now that she's background, like the machines and the fluorescent lights. She changes back into her street clothes in the locker room, and the tremor in her left hand has become more pronounced now, the shrapnel aching the way it always does when she's tired. She takes 2 ibuprofen without water and touches the boots one more time before closing the locker. They're dusty. She should clean them. She probably won't. The dust is part of what they are now, evidence of a life that she was supposed to let go of. Outside, Savannah is beginning to wake up. The sky is that particular shade of grey that comes right before dawn, and the humidity is already making her scrubs cling to her spine. She walks to her car, 2009 Honda Civic, nothing remarkable, nothing that stands out, and sits for a moment before starting the engine. Her hands are still steady on the steering wheel, but the tremor persists in her left hand, rhythmic and patient, like a reminder of something she's supposed to forget. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she'd allowed herself to believe, for just a moment back there in Bay 2, when Hargrove was watching her work, that maybe she could actually pull this off. That maybe 8 months of perfect anonymity, perfect documentation, perfect competence beneath a veil of invisibility was actually going to work. That maybe she could help bring down a man who was breaking his oath and hurting people without anyone ever knowing what she'd been, where she'd come from, or why her hands moved with such terrible precision. The worst part was that she didn't yet know that in 3 days, an unconscious man was going to arrive in her emergency department, and that he was going to be wearing the unit tattoo of the 75th Ranger Regiment, and that one moment of recognition was going to unravel 8 months of careful invisibility in the time it took her to roll up his sleeve. Room 347 smelled like antiseptic and fear. The Chen family had gathered around their mother's bed, daughter standing, husband in a chair, grandson in the corner scrolling through his phone with the practiced indifference of a teenager who'd spent too much time in hospitals. Mrs. Chen's pneumonia was responding to treatment. The antibiotics were working. Oxygen saturation climbing steadily. Brooke explained the medication timing with the precision of someone who'd coordinated combat medical supplies in Baghdad, ceftriaxone every 12 hours. The timing matters because we want consistent levels in her bloodstream. Not too much, not too gaps. Think of it like keeping the fortress walls strong. The daughter leaned forward, writing notes. The husband nodded. Mrs. Chen squeezed Brooke's hand, and in that gesture was gratitude so genuine it nearly broke something inside Brooke's chest. Then the door swung open hard enough to bang against the doorstop. Dr. Hargrove stood in the frame wearing his white coat like a general's dress uniform. His eyes found Brooke first, then deliberately swept to the family. Nurse Sullivan. A word. Now. The word wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with a smile that didn't reach his mouth. Brooke straightened. Of course, Doctor. She followed him into the hallway, closing the door softly behind her. Hargrove turned to face her, angling his body so the Chen family could see them through the small window. What happened next was surgical. Your explanation was unnecessarily complicated, he said loud enough to carry. These patients don't need a pharmacology lecture. They need simple language. He turned partially toward the room, theatrical concern crossing his features like a cloud. I apologize for her confusion, she doesn't have the clinical background to understand these protocols. Brooke's jaw clenched once. Just once. Her hands remained loose at her sides. One measured breath moved through her chest. She said nothing. She did not defend herself. She did not look at Mrs. Chen's face through the window, though she could feel the daughter's shocked expression without turning around. That was the first cut. Precise. Calculated. Designed to plant doubt. Hargrove watched her face for a reaction. When none came, something flickered across his expression, frustration, maybe. The look of a man accustomed to people crumbling. Continue your shift, he said finally, and walked away with the satisfied air of someone who'd won a battle no one else knew was being fought. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Brooke stood alone in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then she returned to room 347 and finished explaining the discharge protocols with the same steady composure she'd maintained for 8 months, for 8 years before that, for as long as she could remember. Mrs. Chen's hand found hers again. Thank you, Mrs. Chen whispered. That man is cruel. Brooke squeezed her hand once. Said nothing. That afternoon, the break room erupted in its usual controlled chaos. Microwaves hummed. Coffee makers gurgled. 3 nurses sat at the table sharing a box of donuts from the bakery on Victory Drive. Brooke entered quietly, pulled her lunch from the refrigerator, chicken and rice in a plastic container, and sat at the opposite end of the table. The room went dead silent. Within 90 seconds, all 3 nurses stood. Gathered their things. One of them, Jamie, who usually smiled at Brooke during handoffs, whispered loud enough to carry Hargrove's pet project. I'd be careful. He's building some kind of case. They left. The door swung shut. Brooke was alone with the hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of the fluorescent lights that never quite turned off, just dimmed at night like they were barely sleeping. She opened her lunch container. Took a bite of chicken. Chewed. Swallowed. Professional. Controlled. Exactly like a person who'd eaten rations in desert heat while listening to mortars in the distance. Then a single tear escaped without permission. It slid down her left cheek with the inevitability of rain running down a window. Brooke wiped it away without looking down, without breaking the rhythm of her breathing, without acknowledging that anything had happened at all. She finished her lunch in 11 minutes. Washed the container. Returned it to her locker. Clocked back in. Her hands were steady. They had been steady in Baghdad. They were steady in Savannah. They would remain steady because anything less was surrender, and she had not survived this long by surrendering. The next morning, the unit board was impossible to miss. Centered on the cork bulletin board between the medication dispensary and the staff schedule was a laminated sheet of paper printed in bold courier font. Brooke's eyes found it before her conscious mind could stop the reaction. Disciplinary action. Employee B. Sullivan. Date, today's date. Infraction, insubordination, questioning physician orders without clinical justification. Details, Nurse Sullivan continues to provide instructions to patients that contradict attending physician guidance. This behavior undermines the patient care hierarchy and demonstrates a pattern of independent judgment inconsistent with hospital protocol. Signature, Dr. Marcus Hargrove, attending physician. Brooke read it once. Then again. The words didn't change. The lamination made it permanent, as if someone expected these words to be there for a very long time. Nurses walked past throughout the morning. Their eyes slid away from the write-up like it was something shameful, something contagious. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody made eye contact with Brooke. In medical records, someone had labeled her folder with a sticky note, "See Discipline Board." What Brooke didn't know, what only 3 people in the entire hospital knew, was that Dr. Marcus Hargrove had been billing phantom consultations for 3 years. Cardiac clearances for procedures that never happened. Orthopedic evaluations he never performed. Kickback arrangements with medical supply vendors that netted him $40,000 every month, paid in transfers to an offshore account in the Caymans. The hospital's compliance department was scheduled to do a random billing audit next month. Not her department. Not his department initially. Just a routine check. Except Brooke's charting was meticulous. Every medication time-stamped. Every order documented. Every note cross-referenced to the actual chart entries. Her precision created an audit trail like a spotlight cutting through fog. Any auditor worth their credentials would find discrepancies immediately. Any investigation into medication administration would lead to questions about orders that didn't exist. And any questions about orders that didn't exist would unravel the entire structure he'd built. She had to be removed. Neutralized. Destroyed if necessary, before she could cause damage she didn't even know she was capable of causing. That evening, as Brooke was restocking the supply room at 6:45, Hargrove appeared in the doorway. He didn't announce himself. He simply waited until she turned, arms full of sterile gauze packages, and then he spoke in a voice low enough that the hallway wouldn't carry it. Private. Intimate. Dangerous. You're a liability, Nightingale, he said, using the call sign he'd overheard another nurse mention once, the one that had stuck like something unpleasant. Every chart you touch. Every order you question. You're building a case against yourself. Brooke set the gauze down on the shelf with deliberate care. One package at a time. She did not rush. I've seen nurses like you before, he continued. You think being careful makes you good. It makes you slow. Dangerous. And I will not have dangerous nurses on my floor. She turned to face him fully. His expensive watch caught the fluorescent light, a Rolex Submariner, $22,000, the kind of watch that doctors wore when they had money that didn't come from salary. His cologne smelled like wealth and confidence, like someone who'd never lost an argument in his life. Brooke took one measured breath. The kind of breath she'd learned in SEAL selection courses, in airborne qualification, in the moment before breaching a door in Fallujah when the intelligence said there were enemies on the other side and the intelligence could be wrong. She let a single tear slide down her left cheek. Not from fear. Not from doubt. From something deeper, the accumulated weight of 8 months of silence, of invisibility, of pretending to be less than she was because staying alive required it. She wiped it away without looking down. without breaking eye contact, without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Then she spoke in a voice like still water, calm and deep and containing terrifying depths. "I've been questioned by better men than you, Doctor." The words hung in the supply room air like a physical thing. His face went white, then red in that order. His jaw clenched. His hand tightened into a fist that he then forced to relax, a gesture that revealed more than any words could, the moment when he realized that she wasn't afraid of him, that his authority meant nothing to whatever she actually was. He turned and walked away without responding. The fluorescent lights hummed. The supply room smelled like antiseptic and power, like the moment right before something breaks. Brooke returned to restocking gauze packages with hands that remained perfectly steady. In 3 days, an ambulance would arrive at the ambulance bay with an unconscious man wearing a tattoo that would change everything. But for now, there was only the work. The silence. The knowledge that she'd drawn a line and Hargrove had seen it, and now he knew, without understanding why he knew, that he was standing in a room with something far more dangerous than a disgruntled nurse. The call came through dispatch at 11:44 p.m. Unconscious male, late 30s, found collapsed outside the Savannah Veterans Center on Victory Drive. No wallet. No identification. No way to know who he was or what he'd survived to get to this moment. The ambulance radio crackled static as the paramedics wheeled him through the emergency bay doors, and Brooke looked up from her charting, that meticulous, obsessive charting that had become her armor and her weapon, and something in her chest went very still. The patient's shirt was torn. His left sleeve hung open. And on his bicep, faded but unmistakable, was a tattoo in the shape of a regiment crest, 75 vertical lines forming a shield, with a ranger tab curved above it. Baghdad. 2009. She didn't think. Her body moved the way trained bodies move when they recognize home. Boots on tile. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her hands were already reaching for the food tray before the paramedic finished his handoff report. Blood pressure 118/76, pulse elevated at 102, no known allergies, found unresponsive outside the vet center, possibly overdose, possibly cardiac, possibly just a man who'd hit bottom and couldn't get back up. Brooke rolled up his right sleeve to start the 4. Standard procedure. Clean the antecubital fossa. Locate the basilic vein. Palpate the median basilic. 1 smooth puncture, catheter seated, blood return confirming placement. She'd done this 3,000 times. But when she reached for the left arm to check circulation, to confirm pulses, her hands froze. The tattoo filled her entire vision. Not just any regiment marker. The specific configuration. The specific line weight. The way the edges had blurred slightly from scar tissue beneath the ink, which meant this man had survived shrapnel, had survived blast radius, had lived through something that carved itself into his skin and into his memory. She knew that tattoo the way she knew her own heartbeat. She'd trained next to men who wore it. She'd bled beside them in a city that burned. 75th Ranger Regiment. Baghdad. 2009. The same year. The same unit. The same war that had erased her. "I've got him," Lisa said from the opposite side of the stretcher. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with grey-streaked hair pulled back so tight it looked like it might snap, and her eyes held the kind of clarity that only came from having seen the worst humanity could offer and deciding to heal it anyway. She'd mentioned once, casually, as if it were nothing, that she'd spent 8 years as a combat medic. Afghanistan. The Korengal Valley. 2 tours. She was looking at Brooke's hands. "Pressure bandage," Brooke said. Her voice was level. Conversational. The voice of a nurse who dealt with unconscious patients every shift. Not the voice of someone whose past had just rolled through the emergency bay doors on a stretcher. "And get me a monitor. Cardiac first." The patient's oxygen saturation held steady at 96 on room air. His color was decent. Whatever had brought him down, and Brooke's mind was already cataloging possibilities: stroke, MI, drug overdose, simple syncope, he wasn't crashing. Not yet. They moved him to the trauma bay. The fluorescent overhead lights cast his features in clinical clarity, scarred jawline, calloused knuckles, the kind of lean musculature that came from discipline rather than ego. His chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of unconsciousness. "To bed," Brooke called to the charge nurse. "I want him monitored constantly. 12 lead EKG stat. We need labs, CBC, CMP, troponin, tox screen." On it, the charge nurse replied. She'd learned by now that when Brooke gave orders in that voice, not requesting, not asking, commanding, the situation warranted precision. Lisa began setting up the monitoring equipment. Sticky pads. Electrode placement. The lead snapped into the monitor housing with satisfying clicks. The screen flickered alive, showing a rhythm that was regular, strong, normal sinus. 78 beats per minute. Steady. Alive. But something was wrong. Brooke's hands were moving before her mind caught up. She was listening, not with her ears, but with the kind of deep clinical awareness that came from understanding human physiology the way a musician understands an instrument. She placed her stethoscope to his left anterior chest wall. Breath sounds present. Clear. Now the right side. Nothing. No breath sounds on the right. No air movement. And when she percussed his right chest, tap, tap, tap with her fingertips across the ribs, the sound was hyperresonant, hollow, wrong. Like tapping a drum that had lost its membrane. "Lisa," Brooke said. "Help me." She was already moving, already reaching for the oxygen saturation monitor on the wall. The number on the screen was dropping. 94, 91. 89. The patient's respiratory rate had climbed. She could see his chest rising and falling faster now, his body responding to the crisis even in unconsciousness. His heart rate jumped with it. 98, 112. 127. The monitor's rhythm hadn't changed, but the tempo had accelerated into the dangerous zone. "Tension pneumothorax," Lisa whispered. It wasn't a question. "Pressure's dropping," Brooke confirmed. She could see it, blood pressure 94/58 on the monitor. The classic triad. Hypoxia. Hypertension. Absent breath sounds. One lung had collapsed, and now air was accumulating in the pleural space, compressing both the lung and the heart, slowly suffocating him from the inside while his own body betrayed him. The patient had maybe minutes. Maybe less. Brooke's voice cut through the noise of the monitors, the beeping, the ambient emergency bay chaos. "Lisa, I need a 14-gauge needle. Second intercostal space, right side, midclavicular line. Now." Lisa's eyes went wide. Not confused. Not hesitant. Wide with recognition. She knew what that order meant. She'd been trained in the same schools, breathed the same desert dust, understood the battlefield calculus of immediate life intervention. She moved without another word, reaching for the needle tray, her hands as steady as Brooke's. "Dr. Hargrove's in the hallway," the charge nurse called out. "Should I get him?" "No time," Brooke said. She was already positioning the patient, rolling him slightly to access the right anterior chest wall. She located the landmarks by palpation, the second rib, the space below it, the midclavicular line, the precise point where you push a needle through skin and muscle and pleural lining and into a space that shouldn't exist. She held out her hand. Lisa placed the needle in her palm. The steel was cold. Exactly 8.3 centimeters long. Gauge 14, which meant large bore, which meant air could escape through it fast enough to matter. Brooke's other hand palpated the exact intercostal space, confirmed the landmarks a second time. You only got one chance, and she'd learned long ago that even one chance could be stolen by hesitation. She drove the needle through the skin in one smooth motion. Subcutaneous tissue. Muscle. The slight resistance of the pleural lining. Then nothing. Void. Air. The hiss of escaping air filled the trauma bay. Just for an instant, just a sound like breath leaving a body, like pressure finding a release valve. The patient's oxygen saturation stopped falling. 88. It held. It climbed. Brooke removed the needle, left the catheter in place, the plastic tube that would stay, that would allow air to continue escaping as his lung re-expanded, that would keep him from dying over the next 30 seconds. O2 sats rising, Lisa reported, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the awe she felt. 89, 92. 94, climbing. The monitor's rhythm hadn't changed, but the tempo was normalizing now. Heart rate dropping from the tachycardic panic back toward something survivable. 110, 98. 88, the patient's color, which had been sliding toward gray, shifted back toward something approximating life. Brooke placed a securing dressing over the catheter with 3 pieces of tape. Diagonal. Precise. The kind of bandaging that would stay through transport, through the ICU, through whatever came next. She stepped back. Lisa was staring at her hands. At the efficiency of the movement. The way each gesture had been exactly what it needed to be. The absence of hesitation. The presence of something that transcended nursing training, something that belonged to a different world entirely. Where the hell did you learn to do that? Lisa whispered. Before Brooke could answer, before she could form even the smallest lie, Dr. Hargrove's voice exploded from the trauma bay entrance like something dangerous finally locating its target. What did you just do? He stood in the doorway, white-faced, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. His hands were trembling, not with concern, but with something else. Fury. Opportunity. The look of a man who'd just been handed the weapon he needed. You just performed a surgical procedure without authorization, he continued, his voice dropping into the register of controlled rage. Without a physician present. Do you understand what you've done? Brooke turned to face him. One measured breath. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were clear. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd already survived worse. I saved his life, she said. The words were simple. They were true. They were also irrelevant. Hargrove's smile was terrible, sharp and satisfied and predatory. The smile of a man who'd just identified his opening. You ended your career, he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words fell like a judge's gavel. He turned to the charge nurse, already reaching for his phone. Document everything. Time, procedure, witnesses. I want a full incident report on my desk in 1 hour. The patient remained unconscious, his oxygen saturation steady at 96%, his heart rate regular. The monitor beeped its mechanical rhythm. Steady. Alive. The ranger's tattoo, that mark from Baghdad, from a war that had erased one woman and was now about to devour her again, was hidden now beneath hospital blankets and the 4 lines of salvation. Brooke watched the ICU team arrive. She watched them move the stretcher, transfer the patient, wheel him toward the elevator. She didn't know his name. Didn't know his story. Didn't know if he'd ever wake up and remember the nurse whose hands had held his life together in the span of 40 seconds. What she did know was that Dr. Hargrove was already in his office, already making calls. To the hospital administrator. To board members who owed him favors. To an outside compliance investigator he'd used before to clean up problems. By midnight, he'd activated his entire network. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It ended careers. The monitor's alarm shrieked through trauma bay for like a wounded animal. The Army Ranger's oxygen saturation was collapsing, 68% and dropping. His chest barely moved. The ventilator wheezed its mechanical rhythm, but something was catastrophically wrong. Dr. Hargrove stood frozen near the door, orders stalled in his throat. The resident fumbled with a chest tube tray, hands shaking. Lisa Chen glanced at the patient's face turning gray-blue, the kind of gray that meant minutes. Brooke moved. Her voice cut through the chaos like a command firing through Baghdad streets. Lisa, I need a 14-gauge needle. Second intercostal space, right side. Now. Not a request. A command. Lisa didn't hesitate. Her hands were already moving, muscle memory recognizing authority when she heard it. The needle appeared in Brooke's palm before anyone else understood what was happening. Brooke swabbed the site with antiseptic, the sharp alcohol smell cutting through the stale blood and adrenaline fog. Her hands moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had done this under mortar fire, who had done this in a collapsed building with dust in her eyes and rounds snapping overhead. Landmark. Midclavicular line. Second intercostal space. The needle went in. A hiss of air escaping. Pressure releasing. The sound of a life returning. The ranger's oxygen saturation climbed. 68. 72. 80. Stable. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm, sinus, normal, alive. The room exhaled. Brooke withdrew the needle with the same measured precision. No flourish. No explanation. She simply documented the time on the trauma sheet in her meticulous handwriting, the same handwriting that had been quietly documenting Hargrove's billing frauds for 8 months, one precise entry after another building an audit trail like a prosecutor building a case. Lisa Chen stared at her, then at the patient, then back at Brooke. The resident was pale. A visitor in the corner had tears streaming down their face. They understood they were watching someone's father, someone's son, come back from the edge. Lisa waited until the ranger was stable, until the attending physician had taken back control of the room, until the crisis had transformed into recovery. Then she stepped into the supply closet where Brooke was restocking the crash cart, hands moving through familiar motions like meditation. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" Lisa whispered. Brooke didn't answer. She sealed a package of gloves with the kind of focus that discouraged follow-up questions. The boots she wore under her scrubs, the ones her husband had resold 3 times before his funeral, the one she touched every morning before her shift, pressed against the tile floor. "That was a tension pneumothorax," Lisa continued, voice trembling slightly. "You knew exactly what was wrong. You knew the exact procedure. You knew it before Hargrove knew it. Before anyone knew it." Brooke placed the last item in the cart. Her jaw tightened once, a single tell, then released. The patient survived. That's what matters. But Lisa had seen something in those precise movements, in that voice pitch to cut through chaos without raising volume, in the way Brooke had taken command of a room without asking permission. Lisa had been a combat medic before nursing school. She recognized the signature. By 7:41 a.m. the next morning, Brooke knew something had changed. Her badge didn't activate at the staff entrance. She tried it again. The electronic lock remained closed. Her stomach tightened, not with fear but with a sudden clarity about what was about to happen. She'd known this was coming. She'd known from the moment she performed that decompression, from the moment she stepped outside her formal scope to save a life that no one else in that room could save. Security found her standing at the locked door. They didn't make it seem like an escort. They were professional about it. But the message was the same: you don't get to come in today. Administrator Kellerman's office was on the 4th floor. The elevator climbed with the slow inevitability of a guillotine blade rising. Brooke carried no bag, no explanations. The boots in her locker already felt like a memory. Kellerman sat behind his desk, the kind of desk that signified administrative insulation from the actual work of saving lives. His expression was professionally grave, the expression of someone delivering bad news while protecting himself from liability. Dr. Hargrove occupied the chair opposite, a folder open on his lap, his face arranged in the careful, concerned architecture of a man presenting evidence of a colleague's inadequacy. "Nurse Sullivan," Kellerman began, and the use of her formal name signaled this was official now, documented, final. "We've received serious concerns about your conduct last night. An unauthorized invasive procedure. Practicing outside your scope of practice. Placing a patient at unnecessary risk." Brooke stood. She didn't sit. Standing gave her the high ground, even in a room designed to make standing difficult. The patient was in crisis, Brooke said. Her voice had dropped an octave since yesterday. Tension pneumothorax. O2 sat 70 and falling. The doctor on duty was not responding to the clinical emergency. Hargrove leaned forward. Exactly my point. You made a judgment about what was medically necessary. That's physician work. You're a registered nurse. There's a scope. You practiced outside it. The patient would be dead, Brooke said flatly. That's not the point, Kellerman interjected, his tone suggesting he was trying to be reasonable with someone who was not cooperating with reasonableness. The point is protocol. The point is that we have procedures for these situations. Chain of command. Consultation with the attending physician. Hargrove opened his folder with deliberate slowness. I've also made some calls about your previous employment. Your work history is inconsistent. There are gaps. Several months in 2009 where your records are completely absent. References are vague. One employer says you left suddenly without notice. Another has no record of you at all. The fluorescent lights hummed their constant complaint. Brooke could hear the ICU monitor bank 2 floors down, a steady percussion of other people's heartbeats. You're suspended, Kellerman said. He slid a box across the desk, cardboard, standard hospital property, containing her locker contents. Her scrub jacket. Her stethoscope. The pair of worn combat boots with the stitching her husband had done 3 times, his hands, his skill, his presence reduced to these fraying seams. Effective immediately. A compliance investigator will review every chart you've touched during your employment here. If we find additional protocol violations, additional scope violations, this becomes termination with cause. Brooke picked up the box. It was lighter than she expected. A life reduced to what fit in cardboard. The boot sat on top, the leather cracked but still bearing the imprint of her feet, the shape of her steps, the weight of 8 months of showing up and performing invisibility while documenting the crimes around her. You're free to go, Kellerman said, already looking at his computer, already moving on to the next administrative task, the next problem to delegate. The hallway between the office and the elevator felt longer than it should have been. 3 nurses she'd worked night shifts with for 8 months stood near the medication dispensary. They turned away when they saw her. One touched another's arm, a warning gesture, the kind that said don't acknowledge her, don't appear sympathetic, don't give Hargrove any reason to question your loyalties. Security escorts weren't necessary. Brooke didn't fight. She didn't argue. She simply walked out of Sacred Heart Hospital at 9:14 a.m. on a Thursday with a box that contained everything they were letting her keep and boots that contained everything they were trying to erase. Her apartment was quiet. Empty. Marcus was at school. She sat at the kitchen table with the box open, the boots in her lap, her hands flat against the leather that had walked through a collapsed building in Baghdad, through 3 redeployments, through a funeral, through 8 months of fluorescent-lit lie. The rain started at 3 p.m. It hammered against the windows like it wanted in, like it knew something the closed door was trying to keep out. Brooke stood at Riverside Cemetery at 5:38 p.m., Section 7, plot for 12, the boots muddy, her uniform soaked through, the headstone reading CPO James Sullivan, Navy SEAL, 1978 to 2011. She sank to her knees in the mud. The sobs came like they hadn't since the funeral, raw and uncontrolled, the kind of crying that military training was specifically designed to prevent. She clutched the boots to her chest and her voice broke into the rain. I promised you I'd keep fighting, she whispered. I promised I'd make it mean something. But I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know how to be invisible and still be me. The rain didn't stop. She stayed until Marcus found her 2 hours later, headlights cutting through the dark, her 17-year-old son stepping into the weather to pull his mother up from the mud and drive her home in silence. Some things couldn't be explained. Some things could only be endured. That night, alone in her bedroom, Brooke opened the shadow box she'd buried in the attic 3 years ago. Navy Cross. Bronze Star with Valor, 2 of them. Purple Heart. Combat Action Ribbon. The photograph in desert fatigues with her unit. The official seal. The documentation. Her past, preserved like evidence. She closed it again and pushed it back into the dark. What she didn't know was that Marcus had noticed the box weeks ago. What she didn't know was that her son was 17 years old, an age when righteousness felt like action, when injustice felt personal, when a mother's sacrifice suddenly looked like a problem that needed solving. What she didn't know was that 3 days later, Marcus would walk through the main lobby of Sacred Heart Hospital carrying that shadow box under his arm, his voice clear across the marble floor, and everything would change in an instant. Marcus walked through the main lobby of Sacred Heart Hospital carrying the shadow box under his arm like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 17 years old, jaw set, eyes that looked exactly like his mother's when she made a decision. The security guard at the desk looked up from his monitor, half interested, until Marcus's voice cut across the marble floor clean and clear. "My mom was fired yesterday. By Dr. Hargrove. And you need to see these." He opened the shadow box on the security desk. Military medals caught the fluorescent light. A Navy cross hung dead center, flanked by bronze stars and purple hearts arranged like a testimony nobody was supposed to hear. The security guard's face went white. He reached for his radio without breaking eye contact with Marcus. "Get the administrator. Now." Within 4 minutes, the main lobby had transformed into something between a tribunal and a shrine. Hospital staff started appearing from the corridors, drawn by the kind of silent tension that travels through a building faster than any intercom announcement. The administrator, Lisa Chen, descended the stairs with the board's compliance officer trailing behind her. Her eyes found Marcus first, then the shadow box. Then she looked past them both, searching the crowd that was gathering. Marcus spoke before anyone could ask a question. His voice didn't crack. It didn't shake. It sounded exactly like someone who had spent the last week preparing to say these words, rehearsing them in the mirror until they felt less like a confession and more like a command. "My mother is Senior Chief Petty Officer Brooke Sullivan." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of people reassembling their understanding of the night nurse they'd worked alongside for 8 months. The woman who never complained. Who charted like a machine. Who touched those old combat boots before every shift like they were sacred. Lisa Chen reached for her phone with shaking hands. "I need someone in records. Now. Pull every sealed military file under the name Brooke Sullivan. Everything." A nurse with 2 decades of Sacred Heart experience stepped forward. "That's our Brooke. The quiet one who works nights." "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's my mom." 15 minutes later, a records officer arrived with a manila folder so thick it looked like it contained someone's entire life. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The room pressed closer. Brooke's military file unsealed itself like a flower opening to witness the sun, and the officer began reading aloud with the kind of reverence usually reserved for scripture. "Baghdad, 2009. Operation Recovery Point. Senior Chief Sullivan led a rescue extraction through the Jolan district after a structure collapse in Sector 12. Pulled 12 soldiers from a collapsed building. Under fire. Sustained shrapnel wounds to the left shoulder and lower spine. Continued operations despite blood loss. Refused immediate evacuation." The officer's voice wavered. "Shrapnel remains embedded. Chronic pain documented in medical records." She kept working through it. Lisa Chen had her hand over her mouth. Around her, the staff was processing a parallel reality. The invisible nurse they dismissed was suddenly visible, and she was enormous. And then the elevator doors opened. The man who stepped out wore navy dress blues. Commander James Reeves, 75th Ranger Regiment, the unit patch visible on his shoulder. The same patch Brooke had been hiding. He walked across the lobby with the kind of presence that made the air pressure change, and every person between him and the administrator moved without being asked. But he didn't stop at the administrator. He walked to Marcus. He extended his hand, and when Marcus shook it, Reeves turned to address the crowd with the precise diction of someone used to being obeyed. "That woman earned a Navy Cross, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. She saved my entire squad." He paused. "Let that settle like a stone dropped in still water. She saved my entire squad when she had no orders to do it. When she was supposed to be extracted. When the operation was already compromised. And she did it anyway because that's who she is. The words hung in the lobby air, each one a nail in the coffin of Dr. Hargrove's authority. Lisa Chen's eyes moved to the stairwell, as if she could suddenly see backwards through 8 months of missed context. The nurse who moved like precision medicine. The one who performed that impossible needle decompression. The one Hargrove had destroyed for knowing more than he did. Where is Dr. Hargrove? Lisa Chen's voice had changed. It carried the weight of institutional power finally aligned with justice. The administrator's assistant cleared her throat. Conference room B. He's on a call with his attorney. He knows about the federal investigation into his billing practices, but... Lisa Chen cut her off with a gesture. She looked at Commander Reeves. I need you to wait here. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. 30 minutes. This ends today. What happened next moved with the terrifying efficiency of dominoes finally falling. The FBI agent who had been conducting a 3-month audit of Hargrove's billing practices walked through the main entrance flanked by federal marshals. Special Agent Morris carried a folder so heavy she needed both hands. Her eyes found Lisa Chen immediately. We have enough, the agent said. Falsified consultation records dating back for years. Supply company kickbacks totaling $870,000. Coordinated billing fraud involving 3 separate shell corporations. And evidence that Dr. Hargrove attempted to obstruct our investigation by arranging a professional vendetta against one of your staff members to create a distraction. She didn't name Brooke. She didn't need to. We're executing the arrest warrant now, the agent continued. Your legal counsel should be present. And your administration needs to understand that your hiring and protection of Dr. Hargrove makes Sacred Heart potentially liable for negligent supervision. That exposure is significant. Lisa Chen's face went through 5 different emotions in succession. Anger. Fear. Then something harder. Resolve. Do it, she said. The board emergency session lasted 47 minutes. Dr. Hargrove sat across from his attorney in a hospital conference room while hospital counsel, federal prosecutors, and board members presented the evidence like a choir performing a requiem for his career. The falsified records came first. Then the billing fraud. Then the fabricated disciplinary write-up against Brooke. The board's compliance officer had cross-referenced it against actual incident reports and found nothing. The charge was fiction. Strategic, calculated fiction. Lisa Chen's voice was ice. Dr. Hargrove, you fabricated a disciplinary action against a staff member to undermine a federal investigation into your own criminal activity. This hospital's legal counsel has advised that your employment is terminated effective immediately. Your medical credentials are suspended pending state board review. Your malpractice insurance carrier has been notified. Security will escort you from the building. The vote was unanimous. Not a single board member abstained. Security walked him out through the main lobby where the cameras were waiting. News vans had already assembled outside. The local stations had gotten word: federal investigation, hospital scandal, corruption at Sacred Heart. Dr. Hargrove walked past the same bulletin board where he had posted Brooke's fabricated disciplinary notice just 2 days before. Security did not let him stop to remove it. The image broadcast on every local news channel that evening was perfect in its poetry: a disgraced physician, hands empty, walking past evidence of his own cruelty, escorted like a criminal because he was one. The news anchors called it a stunning reversals and a federal takedown of hospital corruption. None of them knew the real story. That this man had tried to destroy someone who was already supposed to be destroyed, and had failed because he didn't know who she really was. That night, federal agents executed a search warrant at Hargrove's home. His office was seized. His computer was forensically examined. His attorney negotiated surrender terms, and by the following morning, Dr. Hargrove had been formally charged with fraud, falsification of medical records, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The network he had activated against Brooke, board members he'd cultivated, compliance investigators he'd guided, colleagues he'd called to poison her references, all of it collapsed. Calls went unreturned. A hospital board member who had golfed with him for 8 years released a statement condemning his unconscionable abuse of trust. The industry that had welcomed him began cordoning itself off from his infection. Marcus called his mother that night while she sat in her apartment watching the news coverage in a kind of suspended disbelief. "Mom, you need to come back." Brooke's voice was barely a whisper. "Marcus, I was ordered to disappear 15 years ago. If I surface, if the military finds out who I really..." "Mom, the military already knows." Commander Reeves called his commanding officer. "They've been reviewing your file. The operation that erased you got declassified 6 months ago due to a Senate oversight. You're not buried anymore. You exist again." Brooke didn't speak for a long moment. On her coffee table, the worn combat boots sat beside a framed photograph of her late husband, the same boots he had resold 3 times, the same man who had told her to keep fighting. "They want to reinstate you," Marcus continued. "Officially. With back pay. With an apology. Come back, Mom. Please." The next morning, a Navy captain arrived at Brooke's apartment with sealed orders and a document that rewrote her entire official history. The operation in Baghdad that had erased her was being formally acknowledged. Her records were being unsealed. She was no longer a ghost. She was a person again. 6 months later, Brooke Sullivan walked through Sacred Heart Hospital's main entrance in a business suit the color of slate. Her hospital ID read a new title, Director of Emergency Medicine. The ER that had tried to swallow her in invisibility now reported to her. She rebuilt the protocols. She retrained the staff. She installed the audit systems that prevented corruption before it could root itself. Her office overlooked the ambulance bay, the same bay where an unconscious Army Ranger had arrived that changed everything. He had recovered fully in the ICU. He'd visited once to thank her, showing her the same 75th Regiment tattoo that had triggered her recognition. That tattoo became the logo for Sacred Heart's new veteran outreach program. A reminder that some debts can never be repaid, only honored. On her desk, the worn combat boots her husband had resold 3 times, and a photograph of Marcus in his Navy dress whites. He had enlisted 3 months after the truth emerged, choosing to walk the same path both his parents had walked. Every morning, before her shift began, Brooke touched the boots once. A ritual. A promise. Not to disappear again. Across town, in a strip mall between a payday loan store and a vape shop, Dr. Hargrove sat at a folding table under a banner that read, "Cut rate insurance, all policies." His medical license had been revoked. His assets had been seized to pay restitution. The fraud conviction carried a 3-year suspended sentence and community service. He sold policies to people who didn't recognize his name, didn't know who he had been, didn't understand the magnitude of his fall. The banner flapped in the wind. Brooke drove past it sometimes on her way to the hospital. She never stopped. She didn't need to. At Sacred Heart, she trained a new cohort of emergency medicine nurses. One of them asked about the boots on her desk during a mentorship session. Brooke didn't hesitate. She smiled, a small thing, but real. "They remind me what we're really here for. Not the charts. Not the politics. The people. The ones who come through those doors with no ID, no voice, no one to fight for them. We fight for them. Always." The new nurse nodded, understanding and not understanding at the same time. She would understand later. When the impossible became routine. When saving a life felt like the only logical choice. If you made it this far, you know that true strength isn't found in titles or credentials. It's found in the people who stay quiet, who work their shifts, who touch their sacred objects before facing the world. Subscribe for more stories about the warriors you'll never recognize. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Brooke's position?